Someone asks you for a favor. It's inconvenient. You're already overwhelmed. You barely have time for your own responsibilities. Every rational part of your brain is screaming that you should decline. But instead, you hear yourself saying yes again. And the moment the word leaves your mouth, you feel it. That familiar wave of resentment mixed with resignation. You've done it again. You've agreed to something you don't want to do, don't have time for, maybe can't even afford. And now you're stuck. Stuck with the commitment, stuck with the guilt of wishing you'd said no, stuck with the exhaustion of constantly giving pieces of yourself away to everyone who asks. And the worst part, it will happen again tomorrow, next week, over and over. Because saying no feels impossible. It feels dangerous. It feels like something you're fundamentally incapable of doing. So you say yes. You always say yes. Even when yes is slowly destroying you from the inside out. Even when yes means neglecting yourself, your needs, your boundaries. Even when yes means becoming invisible in your own life. This is what it means to be someone who can't say no. And if this is you, you already know the price. You know what it costs to live as everyone's solution, everyone's helper, everyone's yes person. You know what it's like to feel simultaneously needed and completely empty. This is the psychology of people who can't say no. And it's not about being kind or generous or helpful. Those are beautiful qualities. This is about something else entirely. This is about a pattern that formed so early and ran so deep that saying no feels as impossible as stopping your heart from beating. Today, we're diving into why some people become chronic yes. What's really happening psychologically when you can't set boundaries, and how this pattern is connected to wounds that have nothing to do with the person asking you for help. Because the inability to say no isn't a personality trait. It's a survival mechanism. And understanding that is the first step toward freedom. Let's start with where this begins. Because nobody is born unable to say no. Watch a toddler sometime. They say no constantly. No is one of their favorite words. It's how they establish autonomy, test boundaries, express their wants and needs. No is natural. It's healthy. It's necessary for development. But somewhere along the way, some children learn that no isn't safe. That expressing their needs, their limits, their preferences leads to consequences that are too painful to bear. Maybe you grew up in a home where saying no to a parent meant rage, punishment, or withdrawal of love, where you learned that compliance was the only path to safety, where your boundaries were violated so consistently that you stopped trying to maintain them. Or maybe your parents weren't overtly abusive. Maybe they were just needy. Maybe they leaned on you emotionally, made you responsible for their happiness, taught you that your job was to take care of them. So you learned that saying no to their needs meant causing them pain, and causing them pain felt unbearable. So you said yes. Always yes, even when it hurt you. Or perhaps you grew up in a household where love was conditional, where affection was bestowed when you were good, helpful, compliant, and withdrawn when you weren't. So you learned the equation yes equals love, no equals abandonment. And when you're a child, abandonment is death, not metaphorically. Literally, children depend on their caregivers for survival. So the fear of abandonment isn't irrational. It's biological. And if saying no threatens that bond, then saying no becomes impossible. Your nervous system, won't let you do it because your nervous system's job is to keep you alive. And staying alive means staying connected. Even if that connection requires you to disappear, even if that connection requires you to sacrifice your own needs entirely. Psychologists have extensively studied this phenomenon. It's related to what's called anxious attachment, a pattern that develops when a child's caregiver is inconsistent. Sometimes available, sometimes not. Sometimes loving, sometimes cold. The child learns they can't predict when they'll get their needs met, so they become hyper. They learn to monitor the caregiver's mood, to adjust their behavior to maximize the chances of getting love. They become experts at reading what others need and providing it, often at the expense of their own needs. And this pattern doesn't go away when they grow up. It follows them into every relationship. They become adults who can't say no because saying no still feels like risking abandonment, still feels like threatening the connection they desperately need. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people with anxious attachment styles have significantly more difficulty setting boundaries and are more likely to engage in self-sacrificing behavior to maintain relationships. They'd rather betray themselves than risk losing someone else. There's also a component of self-worth at play. People who can't say no often have a deep-seated belief that they're not inherently valuable, that their worth comes from what they do for others, not from who they are. So saying yes becomes their currency. It's how they earn their place in the world, how they justify their existence, how they ensure that people will keep them around. If I'm useful, I'm valuable. If I'm helpful, I'm lovable. If I'm always available, people will need me. And being needed feels like being wanted, even though it's not the same thing. Being needed is transactional. Being wanted is unconditional. But when you've never experienced unconditional love, when you've only known the kind of love that has to be earned, you learn to confuse the two. You learn to equate being used with being valued. And you structure your entire identity around being indispensable. Let's talk about what this looks like in everyday life. Because the inability to say no isn't just about big requests. It's about everything. Someone asks if you can stay late at work. You have plans, but you say yes. Someone asks if they can borrow money. You can't afford it, but you say yes. Someone asks for emotional support. You're depleted, but you say yes. Your calendar is full of commitments you don't want to keep. Your to-do list is full of tasks that aren't yours. Your bank account is drained from helping others. Your energy is gone from constantly giving, and through it all, you're smiling. You're saying, it's fine. You're pretending it doesn't bother you, because admitting that you're overwhelmed, that you're resentful, that you don't want to do these things, feels like admitting you're selfish. And selfish is the worst thing you can be, or so you've been taught. Here's what happens internally when someone asks you for something. Your immediate response is anxiety. Your body tenses. Your mind races. You should say no. You don't want to do it, but the thought of actually saying that word makes your heart pound. What if they get angry? What if they think I'm mean? What if they don't like me anymore? What if they leave? So you override your own knowing. You ignore the signal your body is sending. You say yes, even though everything inside you is screaming no. And then after you've agreed, the resentment sets in. You're angry at them for asking. You're angry at yourself for agreeing. But you can't express that anger because expressing it would mean admitting you have needs, boundaries, limits. So you swallow it, you internalize it, and it sits there, festering, adding to the mountain of unspoken resentment you recarrying from every other time you said yes when you meant no. The fascinating and tragic thing is that people who KOE and say no often pride themselves on being helpful. They see it as their best quality. I'm the person people can count on. I'm always there for others. I'm selfless. And on the surface, this looks admirable. Society rewards this behavior. People praise you for being so giving, so reliable, so generous. But underneath the praise is something darker. You're not being generous. You're being self-abandoning. You're not being selfless. You're being selfless, as in you have no self. You've erased yourself so completely in service of others that you don't even know what you want anymore. You don't know what your preferences are. You don't know what your boundaries are. You've spent so long accommodating everyone else that you've become a ghost in your own life. Present, but not really there. Giving, but empty. Helping, but drowning. Research on burnout and compassion fatigue shows that people who chronically override their own needs to meet others' needs eventually hit a wall. Their bodies give out. They get sick more often because their immune systems are compromised by chronic stress. They develop anxiety and depression because they're living in a constant state of self. They experience relationship problems because they attract people who take advantage of their inability to set boundaries. A study from the American Psychological Association found that people who have difficulty saying no report significantly higher levels of stress, lower life satisfaction, and poorer physical health compared to those who can assert boundaries. This isn't a personality quirk. This is a health crisis. And it's one that's entirely preventable, but only if you're willing to do the hardest thing you've ever done. Learn to say no. Let's talk about the types of people who can't say no, because they're not all the same. There are the people pleasers, driven by a desperate need to be liked. They'll do anything to avoid conflict, criticism, or disapproval. Then there are the rescuers who've made it their identity to save others. They feel responsible for everyone's problems and guilty if they don't help. There are the guilt-driven ones, often from religious or cultural backgrounds that emphasize self-sacrifice as virtue. They believe that putting themselves first is morally wrong. And there are the conflict avoiders who say yes not because they want to help, but because saying no might lead to confrontation. And confrontation feels terrifying. Each type has slightly different motivations, but the outcome is the same. They all end up living for everyone else while abandoning themselves. The relationship dynamics this creates are particularly damaging. When you can't say no, you attract a specific type of person. The takers, the users, the people who are perfectly happy to let you sacrifice yourself for their benefit. Not because they're necessarily bad people, though some are, but because you're training them to treat you this way. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you're teaching people that your boundaries don't matter, that your time and energy are infinitely available, that they don't need to consider your needs because you don't consider them either. So they keep asking, they keep taking, and you keep giving until one day you look around and realize that every relationship in your life is one-sided, that you're surrounded by people who take from you but rarely give back. And you wonder why you feel so alone, so unseen, so unvalued. But the truth is, you've been teaching people not to value you. You've been showing them through your actions that you're a resource to be used, not a person to be cherished. Here's something that people who can't say no rarely realize. When you say yes to everyone else, you're saying no to yourself. Every chimie, there are only so many hours in a day, so much energy in your body, so much capacity in your life. When you fill that capacity with obligations you don't want and commitments that drain you, you're leaving no room for what you actually need. No room for rest, no room for joy, no room for pursuing your own goals, nurturing your own relationships, taking care of your own well-being. You think you're being selfless, but actually you're being, because you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't help others if you're falling apart. And eventually, inevitably, you will fall apart. The body keeps score. You can override your boundaries for weeks, months, even years. But eventually, the bill comes due. And it comes in the form of illness, breakdown, collapse. Let's address the fear that keeps people trapped in this pattern. The fear of what will happen if they say no. And here's the truth. Sometimes, when you start saying no, people will react badly. Some people will get angry. Some will guilt you. Some will call you selfish or accuse you of changing. Some will leave, and that's devastating when it happens, because it confirms your deepest fear that you're only valuable when you're useful, that people only want you for what you can give them. But here's what you need to understand. The people who leave when you set boundaries where you weren't in a real relationship with you to begin with, they were in a relationship with your compliance, with your yes, with what you could do for them. They never saw you as a full person with your own needs and limits. So when you started treating yourself like a person, they bailed. And that hurts. But it's also clarifying, because now you know, now you can see who was really there for you and who was just using you. And the people who stay, the people who respect your boundaries, who adjust when you say no, who value you even when you're not being helpful, those are your real relationships. Those are the ones worth keeping. The physical manifestations of chronic yes-saying are significant when you're constantly in a state of obligation, constantly betraying your own needs. Your nervous system stays in a low-grade stress response. Your cortisol levels are elevated. Your body is tense. Your digestion is impaired because your body thinks it's in danger. And digestion isn't a priority when you're in survival mode. You might experience chronic headaches, stomach issues, muscle pain, fatigue. Your sleep is disrupted because your mind is cycling through all the things you've committed to, all the people you're worried about disappointing. And overachieving, this chronic stress contributes to more serious health issues, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune conditions, mental health disorders. Your body is literally breaking down under the weight of all the yeses you've given away. So, how do you break free? How do you learn to say no when every fiber of your being is screaming that it is dangerous? The first step is understanding that this isn't about being mean or selfish. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a healthy person. It means you're treating yourself with the same respect and consideration you give everyone else. And you deserve that. You deserve to have your own needs matter. You deserve to have limits. You deserve to choose how you spend your time and energy. This is basic human dignity, and you're allowed to claim it. The second step is starting to notice the pattern. Pay attention to how often you say yes when you want to say no. Notice the physical sensations that come up when someone asks you for something. The tension in your shoulders, the knot in your stomach, the way your breath gets shallow. Those are signals from your body trying to tell you something. Your body knows what you need, even when your mind has been trained to ignore it. So start listening. Start honoring those signals instead of overriding them. The third step is practicing saying no in low-stakes situations. You don't have to start with the big stuff. Start small. Someone offers you a food you don't want. Say no thank you. Someone asks if you want to do something that doesn't interest you. Decline. Someone suggests a plan that doesn't work for you. Propose an alternative. Build the muscle slowly, because saying no is a skill. And like any skill, it requires practice. At first, it will feel excruciating. Your nervous system will sound alarms. You'll feel guilty, anxious, terrified. That's normal. That's your old programming fighting to maintain control. But push through, say the no anyway, and then notice what happens. Usually, nothing catastrophic. The person accepts your no and moves on, or they push back a little. But you survive it. And gradually, you start to collect evidence that saying no is safe, that people don't actually abandon you when you have boundaries, that the sky doesn't fall when you prioritize yourself. The fourth step is examining your beliefs about selfishness. Most people who can't say no have deeply held beliefs that putting themselves first is wrong, that their needs don't matter as much as others' needs, that they have to earn love through service. These beliefs need to be challenged. Where do they come from? Who taught you this? Are they actually true? Or are they just old programming that's no longer serving you? This work is often best done with a therapist because these beliefs are usually rooted in childhood experiences that are painful to revisit. But revisiting them is necessary because you can't change a belief you haven't examined. You can't dismantle programming you're not aware of. The fifth step is learning to tolerate guilt. Because when you start saying no, you will feel guilty. That guilt has been your body's way of keeping you compliant, keeping you safe. So when you violate the old rule, when you say no despite the programming, your nervous system panics. It floods you with guilt as punishment, as deterrent, as a way to get you back in line. But here's the secret. You can feel guilty and still say no. Guilt is just an emotion. It's not a moral judgment. It's not proof that you did something wrong. It's just a feeling. And feelings pass. So you practice saying no, feeling the guilt, and not letting the guilt change your decision. You sit with the discomfort, you breathe through it. You remind yourself that you're allowed to have boundaries even when setting them feels bad. And over time, the guilt diminishes. Your nervous system starts to learn that saying no is actually safe, that you can have boundaries and still be loved, that you can prioritize yourself and still be a good person. The sixth step is building a support system of people who respect boundaries. You need models. You need people in your life who can say no without guilt, who set boundaries clearly and kindly, who show you that it's possible to be caring and still have limits. You also need people who will support you when you start changing, who will celebrate your no's instead of guilting you for them, who will remind you that you're allowed to have needs. These people might not be in your current circle. You might need to seek them out. Therapy groups, support communities, new friendships with people who value reciprocity. But finding your people, the ones who see boundaries as healthy instead of selfish, is crucial. Because you can't heal in isolation. You need witnesses. You need cheerleaders. You need people who reflect back to you that you're redoing the right thing even when it feels wrong. Let's talk about what happens when you start saying no. Because it's not all positive, at least not at first. Some relationships will change. Some people will be confused or upset. They've gotten used to you always being available, always saying yes, and now you're disrupting that pattern. They might push back. They might test your boundaries to see if you really mean it. This is hard, but it's also informative. The people who ultimately respect your boundaries are the ones worth keeping. The ones who don't, who keep pushing, who guilt you or manipulate you or punish you for having limits, those relationships were never healthy to begin with. You just couldn't see it when you were in the fog of people-pleasing. But now, with clearer boundaries, you can see who was actually there for you and who was just there for what you could provide. There's also the identity crisis that often comes with learning to say no. Because if you've built your entire sense of self around being helpful, around being the yes person, then saying no feels like losing yourself. Who am I if I'm not always available? What's my value if I'm not constantly giving? This is scary, but it's also an opportunity to discover who you are beyond the role you've been playing, to find out what you actually like, what you actually want, what you're actually interested in when you're not spending all your energy on everyone else. This discovery process is beautiful. It's like meeting yourself for the first time, the real you, not the accommodating, self-sacrificing version, but the authentic you with preferences and boundaries and needs. That person has been buried for a long time, and excavating them is work. But it's the most important work you'll ever do. Here's something crucial. Learning to say no doesn't mean becoming cold or uncomfortable. It doesn't mean refusing to help anyone ever. It means choosing. It means helping when you genuinely want to, when you have the capacity, when it aligns with your values. Not helping out of guilt or fear or obligation. The help you give from a place of genuine desire to give is so much more valuable than the help you give from resentment. When you help because you want to, you're fully present. You're not counting the cost. You're not building internal resentment. You actually connecting with the person, you're helping instead of viewing them as another drain on your resources. So saying no more often actually makes your yeses more meaningful. It makes your help more genuine. It transforms you from someone who helps out of compulsion to someone who helps out of compassion. There's also the practical reality that saying no creates space in your life, space for rest, space for hobbies, space for relationships that fill you up instead of drain you, space for pursuing goals that matter to you. When you're not constantly overcommitted, constantly running from obligation to obligation, you can actually breathe. You can actually live. And you start to realize how much you've been missing, how much of life you've been absent from because you were too busy being everything to everyone. This realization is bittersweet. There's grief for all the time you lost, all the experiences you missed. But there's also hope, because now you know. And knowing means you can choose differently going forward. Let's address something important. Some people reading this are in situations where saying no genuinely isn't safe. If you're in an abusive relationship, if you're dependent on someone who retaliates when you set boundaries, then the advice to just start saying no isn't helpful. It's dangerous. In those situations, your inability to say no isn't just psychological. It's a realistic assessment of threat. And the work isn't to push through and set boundaries anyway. The work is to find safety first, to create an exit plan, to build support, to get to a place where saying no won't result in harm. This is complex and it requires professional help. Therapists who specialize in domestic violence or abusive family systems can help you navigate this safely. So if this is your situation, please hear this. You're not weak for not being able to say no. You're surviving, and survival is valid. The goal is to get you to a place where you can eventually choose for yourself. But that might not be today. And that's okay. For those who aren't in immediate danger, who are dealing with the psychological aftermath of old patterns rather than current threat, the journey is still hard, but it's possible. You can rewire your nervous system. You can build new neural pathways that associate boundaries with safety instead of danger. You can learn that you're lovable even when you're not useful. You can discover that your worth is inherent, not earned. But it takes time. It takes practice. It takes falling down and getting back up. It takes saying no, feeling terrible about it, and doing it again anyway. It takes therapy, self-compassion, patience, and support. So much support. Here's what I want you to know. If you can't say no, you're not broken, you're not defective, you're not weak. You learned to protect yourself the only way you knew how. You learned that compliance equals safety, that self-sacrifice equals love, that your needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. And that learning made sense in the context where it was formed. It kept you safe when you were small and powerless, but you're not small anymore. You're not powerless anymore. You have choices now that you didn't have then. And one of those choices is to start saying no. Not because you're mean or selfish, but because you're worthy of having boundaries. Because your time matters. Because your energy matters. Because you matter. Not for what you do. Not for what you give. But because you exist, that's enough. You're enough. Just being you, just taking up space, just having needs and limits like every other human on this planet. The inability to say no has cost you so much. It's cost you your time, your energy, your peace. It's cost you your health, your joy, your sense of self. It's cost you real relationships because you've been too busy performing availability to actually connect. But it doesn't have to cost you your future. You can learn, you can change, you can become someone who says no clearly, kindly, without guilt. Someone who helps from choice rather than compulsion. Someone who knows their worth isn't tied to their usefulness. Someone who can rest without feeling lazy. Someone who can prioritize themselves without feeling selfish. That person is possible. They're inside you right now, waiting for you to give them permission to exist, waiting for you to say no to all the things that do you and serve you so you can finally say yes to yourself. And here's the thing about saying no. It gets easier. The first no is excruciating. The 10th is hard. The 100th is uncomfortable. But eventually, it becomes natural. Eventually, your nervous system recalibrates. Eventually, you stop feeling like you're betraying yourself every time you set a boundary. Eventually, saying no starts to feel like self-respect instead of selfishness, like self-care instead of cruelty, like honoring yourself instead of abandoning others. And when you get there, when you can say no without the crushing guilt, without the paralyzing fear, without the desperate need to justify yourself, you'll realize something profound. You'll realize that the people who truly love you never needed you to say yes to everything. They love you for who you are, not what you do. And the ones who don't, they were never yours to begin with. So let them go. Say no. Choose yourself. You've spent long enough choosing everyone else. It's your turn now. It's always been your turn. You just needed permission to take it. So, it is permission granted. Say no as often as you need to, without explanation, without apology, without guilt. You're allowed. You always were